Okay, let's jump right in. We're doing a deep dive today on something that is just fascinatingly complex and I think really important. We're talking about suspiciousness, even paranoid thinking in individuals with autism spectrum disorder.
And it's so vital because, paranoia isn't even considered a core symptom of ASD, but the numbers are kind of shocking.
There they are.
Our sources show that up to, 34.8% of autistic individuals report some form of this suspicious or even delusional thinking.
That is massive. And then you look at the risk for actual clinical psychosis, and it's something like 23.5% for people with ASD versus, under 1% for the general population?
Yeah, less than 1%. It's a huge difference.
So the mission here really is to figure out why. Why is this happening? And maybe more importantly, how is this paranoia fundamentally different from what you'd see in, say, schizophrenia?
Right. And the mechanism is really the key. In ASD, the suspiciousness is, it's overwhelmingly an anxiety-driven response.
So it's adaptive.
Exactly. It's an adaptive response that's rooted in a failure of social interpretation. It's not a fixed delusion where reality is completely fragmented. It's more that the person is just confused. They're misinterpreting the input they're getting.
But why does their brain default to threat? I mean, what's fueling that anxiety and making them misinterpret things so negatively?
It really breaks down into three main drivers. The first is cognitive. It has to do with inherent difficulties in what we call theory of mind.
Okay, wait, let's pause there. For anyone listening, can you break down what a theory of mind deficit actually looks like in practice?
Sure. It just means having difficulty inferring what other people are thinking or feeling, their intentions, their beliefs. And if you can't smoothly guess what your coworker is thinking,
you're going to assume the worst.
You're naturally predisposed to see ambiguity as a threat. It's just safer. The brain defaults to danger.
Right. Okay. So that's the cognitive driver. What's number two?
Number two is sensory. The sensory processing differences, like being hypersensitive to sounds or lights, it keeps the nervous system in a constant state of hypervigilance.
So they're basically primed for danger just because their environment feels like an assault on the senses.
It can, yeah. It's overwhelming, sometimes even painful. And that brings us to the third driver, which is just, it's tragic, really. It's real-world trauma.
The bullying.
The bullying. When you hear that 67% of kids and adolescents with ASD report being victims of bullying, their suspicion isn't a defect anymore.
It's a learned response. It's justified mistrust from actual experience.
Wow. And this is exactly why getting the diagnosis right is so critical. In a primary psychosis, the relationship between the self and the world can become unstable, fragmented. But in ASD, that relationship is stable. The person knows who they are.
It's their framework for interpreting the world that's flawed because of all that confusion.
Precisely. And that can lead to huge diagnostic mistakes. Think about the sensory issues.
Oh, yeah.
An autistic person might genuinely hear the low hum of electricity in the walls. To them, that is a real sensory experience. But an uninformed clinician could easily hear that and mistake it for an auditory hallucination.
A hallmark of psychosis.
Exactly. And we even see this in cognitive patterns. Research shows non-autistic people with high paranoia tend to jump to conclusions. They don't need much data to form a belief.
Okay.
But with ASD, we sometimes see the opposite. Because they're so confused by social rules, they might actually engage in more data gathering. They're trying to collect all the puzzle pieces.
But they still can't assemble the puzzle correctly at the end.
Their interpretation of the data remains impaired. And that failure to synthesize information, to trust, it leads to profound isolation. It's a huge barrier to even getting help.
So where do you even start? How do you manage this?
It has to be sequential. You can't just throw therapy at it. Tier 1, the absolute first step, is environmental and sensory stabilization. You have to lower that baseline anxiety.
With things like clear schedules, consistency, maybe dimming flickering lights, or dampening loud noises?
All of that. Lower the nervous system's load first. Only then can you move to Tier 2.
Which is an adapted form of CBT, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes, and it has to be adapted.
Right.
Traditional talk therapy often fails because it's too abstract or relies on metaphor. The adapted CBT has to be concrete, visual. We use a behavior-first approach.
What do you mean by that?
We emphasize creating small, safe, repeatable social engagements. For example, maybe the person goes to the same deli every Tuesday and orders a sandwich, and nothing bad happens.
I see.
That safe interaction, that success, becomes concrete, empirical data. It's proof you can use to challenge the suspicious thought. You're using real-life success to rewire the thinking.
That's a really powerful feedback loop.
We're looking at a bunch of sources that all ask this one big question. Is social interpretation training, or SIT, really the right tool for the job?
And it's such necessary work. The reports are pretty clear that people with ASD can experience these feelings of suspicion a lot more often than the general population.
Wow.
But the critical thing to understand here is that the cause is, well, it's multifactorial. You can't just aim a treatment at one single target.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Because I think if you hear the word paranoia, your mind immediately jumps to something like persecutory delusions. What you might see in schizophrenia.
Sure, that's the common association.
But the sources are saying that suspicion in ASD it's qualitatively different. It seems to come from this profound social confusion.
That's exactly it. It's about the difficulty in reading subtle social rules, the coordinates of a conversation. The social world is just so ambiguous.
So it's less of a fixed belief and more of a constant state of alert.
Yes. It often shows up as this generalized social vigilance or even social cynicism. It's not always a specific belief like that person is out to get me. It's more of a logical, if really exhausting adaptation to just not knowing what people mean.
So if it's about misinterpretation, I guess the obvious question is, isn't that just a social skills problem? Why look deeper than a skills deficit?
That is the crucial question, isn't it? And you're right, the foundational piece is certainly what we call a social interpretation deficit or impaired theory of mind. It makes it hard to decode subtle cues, especially, threatening expressions like angry or afraid.
But that's just the trigger.
That's only the trigger. And this is where that transactional model you mentioned comes into play.
Oh, okay.
So the social interpretation deficit might be the initial trigger that causes the confusion, but that suspicious state gets maintained by chronic social stress. And very often, trauma.
You mean things like bullying?
Exactly. The sources point to extremely high rates of peer rejection and bullying, and those are huge risk multipliers. That history basically trains the nervous system into a state of hypervigilance.
So it becomes a trauma response. The body just starts to expect harm.
It's an adaptive response. Your brain and your body are just trying to protect you from getting hurt again.
Okay, so if the root of the maintenance is anxiety and trauma, then just skills training on its own, it feels like it wouldn't be enough.
It's insufficient, yeah.
I mean, interventions like structured social skills training, things like the peer program, are so important. They give explicit rule-based instructions, and they use things like video modeling to lower the anxiety while you're learning.
And they are absolutely necessary, don't get me wrong. They build competence and they reduce that initial confusion we talked about, but they're just not enough to dismantle that deep-seated hypervigilance.
So the skills tell you what to do.
But they don't manage the underlying anxiety that's making you suspicious to begin with.
The cognitive research here really stood out to me. We usually link paranoia to that jumping to conclusions bias, the JTC bias.
That's a common link, yes.
But some of these studies found that certain adults with ASD actually needed significantly more evidence before they would make a social judgment.
Which points to deep uncertainty, not impulsivity. It just goes to show you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach to cognitive retraining. It's bound to fail.
So what do the sources recommend? What does an integrated therapy approach actually look like?
Well, it means pairing that competence building with real psychological therapies. You need things like adapted cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBP, to help challenge those negative thought patterns that automatically assume bad intent.
And I saw a lot of mentions of ACT.
Yes, acceptance and commitment therapy. ACT is highlighted because it works on increasing psychological flexibility, your ability to tolerate uncertainty, and that's key. It directly targets that anxiety-fueled cycle that keeps the suspicion going.
So if you're trying to put this all together, what's the big takeaway?
The takeaway is really a mandate for integration. SIT is necessary for building competence and clarity. You need the skills. But a successful intervention has to be a multimodal approach.
Meaning?
It means you have to integrate trauma-informed care with anxiety management like ACT or CBT right alongside the skills training. You can't solve a trauma-induced anxiety state with a conversational script.
What's fascinating is that right now, the research literature doesn't really have clinical trials that use paranoid ideation as the main way to measure success for skills training. We're still kind of guessing how much of the benefit comes from the skills versus just managing the anxiety.
It's a huge gap.
So as you think about this, maybe ask yourself, how often in any therapeutic setting do we confuse building someone's competence with actually helping them achieve emotional regulation?
So wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway, the most provocative thought for the future here?
I think the most promising direction is in validating those objective cognitive markers we talked about, that data gathering bias, for instance.
So finding a way to actually measure it.
Exactly. If we can quantify the cognitive difference between ASD-driven suspicion and primary psychotic mechanisms, we can give clinicians objective tools. And with those tools, we can finally make sure the right intervention is targeting the right root cause every time.
Would you like to schedule a paid private coaching session? This will be in the form of a face-to-face Zoom call. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this Calendly link. If you click on that link, it'll open up my calendar. You can pick the available days and times that works for your schedule. You'll get a follow-up email immediately after purchasing a session that will have the Zoom link that coincides with the day and time that you picked. I will get an email too that you scheduled a session, and I will be available on that exact day and time, and we will talk. I look forward to working with you.